It's another Spike Studio production. Welcome everybody to part 2 of the TDI series with Tom Duff and Marie Scott. This time they talk to you about TDI from the administrator perspective, do an excellent overview of how to integrate Active Directory, working with Bez, working with SQL, from the administrator point of view and how you'll actually move data back and forth between the two directory structures, synchronization, and we answer a ton of questions at the end. Look for a third follow-up part, possibly on Lotus Connections and TDI. Otherwise, enjoy this from Consultant in Your Pocket.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to start on time today for another session with Tom Duff and Marie Scott, another session on Tivoli Directory Integrator. You're lucky today. We're not going to run through any sponsor stuff, but I have some news I need to tell you about before we go. This is Chris Miller. For those that don't know, it's the Consultant in Your Pocket series for webcast. We are running both administrator and developer webcasts, and actually some product informational ones coming up. You'll be able to get everything you need to know, and I'll actually switch screens, at the Consultant in Your Pocket site. Next week, Bill Michalski will be doing an e-discovery webinar, which will be excellent. He's done that session numerous times. Registration will open for that later today. We had to work out the final abstract for the session. He's done that roundabout session 2 or 3 times, plus written a multi-part document for Lotus User Group, actually talking about e-discovery and archiving policies and principles, and that's what his company pretty much does. So he's going to be doing another free one next week on the 26th for that, as well as on June 2nd, we'll be doing one on deploying plugins, and it'll actually be plugins and widgets now for Lotus Notes and for SameTime itself. So that was sponsor for that will be Plantronics. But we'll be actually talking about the security, the architecture, everything else from deployment you need to know on those. So that registration is open now. Second piece, IMLUG. IMLUG is now officially, over halfway full in terms of registrations. So if you're going to register, get approval now. Also, you should know that the keynote speaker and a couple other big announcements are coming this week. Those are all locked and ready, but we had to wait a few days to announce until after some other events took place. And also the last part is, for the Lotus User Group, for IMLUG, Tack It On was added. Tack It On is full one-day seminar events the day after IMLUG. It's 3 different choices that you have. As an attendee, you get a big discount. But Snaps is presenting iPhone development. Matt White's coming from London to do his awesome X Pages 101 seminar. And then there'll be another one for administrators for the Domino Optimization Tour, which, forget all the new stuff, everything that they're showing you that comes out day to day. This shows you how to get your current environment up and running smoothly. All 3 events take place the day after. So 2 days of free events and then a day of a seminar event, all in St. Louis, August 2nd and 3rd for IMLUG, and the Tack It On event happens on the 4th. So I know Marie and Tom are both sitting out there, right, both of you?
Yes, we are.
There they are. I'm going to change the screen over to Marie and let her take control, everybody. So if you have questions, please submit them into the question area. There is also an open chat that also sits in there. Let's see what else we need. I think that's about it, everybody. If you have questions, raise your hand, and we'll try to get to you and help you out. So, Marie, I'm going to change it to you. And, wow, there you go. If you start sharing your screen, we should be good to go. There we go. Excellent.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start us off. I'm Tom Duff. As you can probably figure out, I'm not Marie Scott. Today we're going to be talking about Tivoli Directory Integrator, the best free tool you've never heard of. And instead of taking the developer's perspective, as we did on the last session, this time we're going to look at it from the administrator's side in more of the true directory integration, which is what you sort of think of when you think of TDI or Tivoli Directory Integrator. Agenda-wise, we're going to do a real quick overview of the architecture and concepts to get you up to speed if you've never looked at it or worked with it before. We'll discuss the entitlement, what causes this to be a free tool that you can use within Domino. Then we will go ahead and do an intro into using TDI with directories, a couple examples using synchronization of Domino to Active Directory, and then Active Directory to Domino, both directions. We'll have some extras at the end that talk about some additional things that you can do from more of an administration standpoint for directory stuff. List some resources, and hopefully we will have time for questions when we get done. So next screen, Marie. Tivoli Directory Integrator, you've got a really nice definition here. The best way to think about it, or what we think about it as, is kind of the Ginzu knife or the Swiss Army knife of moving data back and forth and syncing data between sources. TDI is very good for if you've got migration scenarios where you have to move data from one source to another, so you can move things, do some data manipulation, some data cleaning during that process, and keep them in sync, either as an event that occurs when something triggers it, or as a scheduled run that says, okay, every night at such and such time, I'm going to be moving data back and forth. The integration piece is real nice, as you're going to see today with the directory integration. And to keep things synchronized, too, so that you don't have one data source that's got information that becomes slowly out of sync over the course of the day or the week or the month, and then you have to do a one-time sync. With TDI, you can really use that to make sure that you keep both sides up to date without having to do extra work to keep it in that particular state. Next slide. This is the eye candy chart that gives you a little bit more of a overall architectural view of what TDI looks like behind the scenes. The most important thing to understand on this, without going into great detail, is that TDI is based on Java and Eclipse. So if you've worked with the Eclipse framework, when you get into TDI and start working with it, you're going to see stuff that is extremely familiar to you. And it should be a very short learning curve in terms of where things are placed on the screen and how you set things up to run. And it also runs on either the client or the server. In the situations you're seeing here and what we demoed both today and last week, we were running TDI on our machines, on our local machines, and we were able to do an extreme amount of stuff in that particular environment. You can also install this on the server platform, be it Windows, Linux, AIX, Solaris, whatever, and you will find that this Army knife, Swiss Army knife tool will run just as well in any of those environments, local or server-based, and you can use that to accomplish the needs that you have in your environment. Next slide. Now, one of the things that you will see and hear us talk about, actually two things in TDI, are assembly lines and connectors. The assembly line you can think of as your job stream that says, connect to one data source, do the following types of work to write out to the other data source. And to get to those two data sources, you're going to use what are called connectors. And connectors are predefined, call it widgets for lack of a better term, that you can pull in that are already set up for you in TDI to say, I want to connect to a file system, I want to connect to a notes database, I want to connect to an Ldap directory. Any of these types of connectors are already out there, so all you have to do is select it from a list, go through the configuration process that's already set up there in a wizard fashion, and you've got your connector built. You don't have to do a lot of coding from ground zero to get that in place. And what will it connect to? Well, as you see on this chart, there's a heck of a lot of things out there that it will connect to. Odds are, if you've got certain needs, you'll find a connector that's very similar or exact to what you need in this list. And if you don't have one out there, or you don't find what you need out there, you can always build your own connector. So you've got some options set up there that are very nice. But there's so much power just right default configuration that it works out really nicely in terms of the connectors that are established. Next slide. Now, Marie has been known for saying on occasion, TDI, it's free.
Not me.
The scenario that enables it to be free is that if you're running Domino and you're using TDI, and Domino is either the source of the data that you're using TDI for, or it's the destination that you're using TDI for. In those situations, TDI is a free entitlement for you. So if you're moving Domino data to a SQL database, or if you're taking an Active Directory and getting information to pull it into the Domino Ldap, those are all situations where TDI is yours. All you have to do is download it, and you can start using it without having to worry about additional costs and licensing. Now, if you were trying to go Active Directory to a Microsoft SQL server, no, in that case you wouldn't have an entitlement. But having said that, perhaps you could make it to where AD goes to a notes database, and then the notes database syncs up to the SQL server. In that particular case, since Domino's involved, you would have your entitlement. You could run it. There's some additional information there in the URL that you can go to get updates on the entitlement information to find out a little bit more about how that works. But basically, if you're using Domino within TDI, it's free. And when you install it, make sure to go out to Fix Central to get the latest fix packs, because IBM is actively maintaining and updating and fixing things in TDI, so you will see frequent fix packs out there that are easy enough to get from Fix Central. Next slide. And to find TDI on the IBM Passport site, you'll see the screens here. Very easy to go out and find. You look at your download options, pick whether you want to see associated products at no additional charge. Your TDI should show up in that case. You'll see in the bottom you've got TDI version 6.1 and TDI 7.0. 7.0 is the most current copy. That's what we're going to be showing you today. But if you need to use 6.1 for whatever situation, I believe, Marie, it doesn't
Connection.
Yeah, Connection still uses TDI 6.1. So depending on what you're using it for and how you're using it, you may have to use one or the other, but they're both still out there on the Passport Advantage site. So next slide. And this is where I hand it over to Marie. We get into the guts of what's going on. So Marie, go with it.
Okay. My name is Marie Scott. I'm primarily a Domino administrator. And as a Domino administrator, we create accounts and need to deal with directories. I've been a user of Tivoli Directory Integrator for that reason for about 5 years. So with that, we're going to go on to the next slide. What are we going to do today? As I said, many of us have environments where we need to update the Domino directory with, corporate data. We normally have corporate systems, enterprise systems where our person data is stored, and we're asked to include that information in the Domino directory, or we're also asked to provision accounts from central authentication services like an Ldap server or Active Directory. So let's ask a few questions. What if we could use TDI to update the person document in the Domino directory from an Ldap or Active Directory source? What if we could use TDI to provision Internet-only accounts in the Domino directory from Ldap or Active Directory? And what if we could use TDI to provision full-blown notes accounts when an equivalent account is provisioned on the Ldap or Active Directory side? And these scenarios are all possibilities. The scenarios that we're going to talk about today are primarily the first two, where we're going to update person document information and we're going to provision Internet-only accounts in the Domino directory. But we're going to include some resources for you so that if you are interested in provisioning full-blown, and what I mean by full-blown accounts, I mean with mail files and mail templates, we're going to have a slide that shows you resources on the parameters that you need to pass to TDI to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a TDI project, which is your mechanism for organizing all your TDI objects. We're going to create some connector templates that we can use over and over and over again, and then we're going to create two assembly lines. One is going to be for Domino to Active Directory, and the other one is going to be for Active Directory to Domino. Now, some steps that we're going to be using to do this are we're going to be connecting to Active Directory. We're going to connect to the Domino names.nsf. We're going to detect if any additional users have been created in Active Directory, and if so, we're going to create them in the names.nsf. We're going to detect any changes in information in Active Directory. For example, if a phone number has changed, if a business address has changed, but we're not going to change the internet address, the internet email address, because we're assuming that Domino is going to be the owner of the email data. We're also going to detect if any accounts have been deleted in Active Directory. So, for example, a person has left the company and the Active Directory is, the manager of all kind of authentication processes. So the AD owner has deleted the account. Well, we want to make sure that the Domino account is deleted as well, and we've got a process that will delete it in Domino via admin P. Then on our other assembly line, we're going to detect if there are any changes in Domino. For example, if on the Domino side, person information has been updated, including the internet email address, and we're going to update those in Active Directory, then we're going to detect if there are any deletes in Domino and make sure that those are also flagged in Active Directory. We're going to do some if and else if branches, and we're also going to do some JavaScripting. Now, when we think of Active Directory and TDI and Domino, we kind of need to remember that a lot of this is all related to Ldap. So when you start working with TDI and you start mapping out what you really want to do, you want to make sure that you know your Ldap schema. Or if you don't, find your local Ldap administrator or AD administrator and start bugging them. You're going to want to make sure that you have an Ldap or AD user ID that can read or write to that Ldap directory with appropriate access to do so. You're going to want to know what kind of organizational units, and that's specifically an Ldap type schema. You're going to want to know about organizational classes. One thing you're going to want in your toolkit is the Softera Ldap browser, which is free, and this will help you if you need to look at the data ahead of time, either from a Domino perspective or from an AD or Ldap perspective, to see the schema, to see how the data is laid out. Because if you look at Ldap data, different Ldap servers present data differently. They might use, as we know, Domino uses slashes between organizational units versus Active Directory, which uses commas. Another thing that you want to consider is if you're creating notes accounts, an Ldap connection is not a process that you can use to create full-blown notes accounts. And there are some connectors that you want to use if you want to do that. We'll go into details about that in a bit. So, some things that you want to do ahead of time on the Domino side in order to make sure that you have appropriate access. From the admin client in Ldap settings, you'll want to make sure that let's back up a minute. You'll want to make sure that one server in your Domino domain is running Ldap. And it doesn't have to be the same server that's running your administrative tasks in your primary admin P server. It just needs to be a server somewhere. So if you've got a server that's not, that busy and you're using it for other things, you can run the Ldap server task on it. But you'll want to be sure that the Ldap settings in the admin client are set to allow Ldap users write access. This is really important. Additionally, you'll want to make sure that whatever ID that you're going to be using to update Domino has the appropriate security in the ACL and the names.nsf. So if you're using XACL, you want to make sure that those settings filter down to the Ldap side of the XACL. Now, if you've ever looked at the Domino Ldap schema or are not familiar with it, it's stored in the schema.nsf. It's a database that gets installed automatically when you install Domino. It stores all the Ldap attributes, attribute types, object classes, all the gidgets and gadgets for Ldap as they relate to Domino. And if you want to understand how Domino might be using them and how the data is stored, this is the place to go. And if you do need to modify the Ldap schema on the Domino side, this is also the place you want to go. Now, if you were using TDI and all you wanted to do was, let's say Active Directory was your source for person information, and all you wanted to do was update phone numbers and say business addresses, then probably the easiest thing to do would be to use Ldap connectors on either side. They're easy to set up, it's easy to move data back and forth. You don't have to worry about any kind of other connectors. There's really not a whole lot of logic that you have to use. So just keep in mind, you don't have to build a very complex assembly line if you don't have to. And we're going to just show a couple examples. This is what a connector config looks like. And we made a decision not to actually run through a live demonstration of TDI just because of bandwidth issues. So we're going to try and show a lot of these things on screenshots. If you want us to include the XML file that we actually use to build some of these, we can be sure to send us an email and we can shoot this off to you. But anyway.
And Marie, can I interject here real quickly too?
Sure.
When we did our last session, you'll find in that one we do a lot of, okay, go out, create the project, create the assembly line, then get everything set up in terms of your connectors. Plus we also go through some of the terminology as far as connectors, entities, things like that. So if you're still a little unsure,
and installation of TDI.
Right, an installation of TDI. So if you're still a little unsure as to where exactly Marie is in the whole scheme of the overall TDI thing, I would strongly suggest you go back and get the PDF or listen to the recording of that webcast, and you will get up to speed and then be able to pick up from where she's at right now. So just think of the two as kind of a partnership in terms of the two sessions.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a Domino Ldap connector. And the connectors are nice because there's already pre-coded connectors that you can use. And we're just going to use the base Ldap connector. And we're going to give it a name. We're going to call it Domino Ldap 1. And we're going to put it in a mode of iterator. And you have the ability to set modes for your connectors. And an iterator mode is probably the one I use probably most frequently, in that it scans your data source, reads the attributes, and then delivers each one to the assembly line. So it's very handy. Sometimes I'll just set it up just to see the data. Now, after you set up your connector, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to actually set up the connection to your Domino Ldap server. And a couple things that you'll notice here, we're using a non-standard Ldap port here in our example because we were running everything on the same server instance. We were running AD on the same server as we were running Domino, but in most cases you would be using a standard Ldap port. But the login username is your user that has the appropriate access to read and write to the Domino directory. The login password is going to be the internet password for that ID. Your search base is generally going to be the organizational domain of your Domino domain. And your search filter is how you drill down to make sure that you're not getting everything in the Domino directory. If you know, there's lots and lots of stuff stored in the Domino directory. You've got server documents, you've got program documents, and they each have objects in Ldap. And we don't want all that stuff. We only want things that relate to the Domino person document. So your object class is very useful in terms of being able to filter out those kind of things. Now, when you set up a connector and you make your authentication, you have the ability to right-click on that connector and browse the data. And you can click on the next button to see the data in each attribute. And I think this is just one of the coolest features in TDI, and that it actually lets you see what's in the data. And this will be really helpful later when you need to map and make any kind of parsing changes between data sources. So let's say you've got an Active Directory that, as I said, uses commas, and you needed to get in a format where Domino uses slashes and a full canonical name. This gives you the ability to see that data as it's actually stored. And you can actually also view what attributes are being included in the schema. And this kind of gives you an example. We've clicked on Next, and we're seeing that the $DN, or display name, gives us a value of CN equal Dr. Notes, comma, O equal Top Chefs. Now you're going to see Top Chefs a lot. That was our test server. We're also looking at the canonical name, CN equal Dr. Notes. We're seeing lots of things here like client build and lots of other goodies that are here. One other thing I'd point out about this screen is that it's kind of not highlighted right now, but the Connect button is also very useful as it tests to make sure that your authentication settings that you've set up previously in the connector are set up correctly, because you're not going to be able to connect if they're not. So you hit that Connect button. If it comes back and all these other buttons are then highlighted, then you know you've connected successfully, and then you can press Next to parse through each of your records. Okay, so today the connectors that we're actually going to build are an Ldap connector, which is used to connect Ldap directories, in this case Active Directory and Domino. We're going to use a Domino change detection connector, which is very handy because it reports on any objects in the notes database that are added, modified, or deleted. And it's not limited to the names.nsf, but in this case we're going to use the names.nsf. We're going to use an Active Directory change detection connector, which reports on any objects that are changed in Active Directory. And then finally, we're going to use a very specialized connector called the Domino Users Connector, which is the one that you want to use when you're going to create, delete, or modify notes user information in the names.nsf or admin4.nsf. And this is the one that if you want to provision accounts, is the one that you want to use, because it actually sets off commands to admin P. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new TDI project. And as I said earlier, your project is your mechanism for organizing all your attributes. You can call it whatever you want. It's just something that it's more indicative to you, just so that you can keep track of all the little objects that you're using when you're creating your assembly lines. And what's nice about the connectors is you can reuse them. So you can create kind of connector templates, to use a kind of a notes word. And what we're going to do is we're going to create 4 connector templates. We're going to create one called AD_LDAP, which is based on the LDAP connector, AD changes based on the Active Directory change detector, Domino changes, which as I mentioned is going to be Domino change detector, and then finally Domino users based on the Domino users connector. So the first one we're going to create is our AD_LDAP connector. And we're going to use the pre-configured LDAP connector. We're going to give it a name of AD_LDAP. And the mode that we're going to use is add only. And the add only mode will only add new entries into a data source. And as you'll see, this will become more important later as to why we're going to set it up this way. We're going to connect it to our AD server, which is Viking1topchefs.com. We're using a username administrator-cn / users, DC equal topchefs, DC equal com. The login password is the AD password. Our search space, as you see, is a little different looking than a Domino search space, but this is the highest level search space on the AD side. Our domain on the AD side is topchefs.com. And again, we're using a search filter so that we're only going to pull back objects as they relate to person documents. We don't want things as they relate to different groups or server-related things, because you know all that stuff stored in Active Directory.
Hey, Marie, it's Chris. We got two questions that go right with that slide asking, what if you were using TLS or FIPS or connecting via SSL to your LDAP server? Does it change anything besides making that LDAP-S or anything else that you know of?
No, You just, there's some TDI settings that go along with configuring the TDI process in general to make sure that it will use SSL. But if you need to connect to your LDAP or Domino server using SSL, you just use the LDAP-S and the appropriate, what is it, 669, whichever the SSL port that you're using for that. That's all you've got to do. Okay, so the next connector we're going to create is AD changes, and this one's going to be based on our Active Directory change detection connector. We're going to use iterator mode so we can look at each of the objects. In this case, again, we're going to be using the login username that we used previously, the same search base. And because it's an iterator, we're going to use an iterator state key, and we're just going to go with the default. The iterator state key is used in determining when last changes took place. Because this is a change detection connector, Tivoli will keep track in its internal databases as to when a change took place, and this internal key is important in doing that. But you can generally go with the default. It's not something that you usually have to worry about.
So Marie, on these particular connectors that you're doing, these are based on triggers to where the whole assembly line will end up firing when it sees the change take place, correct?
But for the ones that are based on the change detection type connectors, right. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, the next one we're going to create is the Domino change detection connector. And again, the keyword is change detection. So it will detect when a change has occurred on whatever database and notes Domino that you can connect to. And we're going to set this one up again in iterator mode. Now, this is a different type of connection than we used previously connecting to Domino. This is using a session type called local client. You can also set this up as a DIOP client if you need to. What the local client session does is it actually uses a stored copy of the ID file that you're going to be, of the ID you're going to be using to authenticate with. So in this case, we're going to be using the ID file of Dr. Notes This is going to be stored on the TDI server. The password that we're going to be using here is the password that's actually associated with the notes ID file. So that's a little different than the Ldap one where you're actually using the Domino Internet password. The database, yeah, sure.
I was going to say, in notes, if you're connecting to something on the Domino side, there are some jar files that you need to copy from the Notes Domino directory into the TDI directories. So definitely reference back to the first webcast that we did in the first PDF, because it does talk about Notes jar file, where you need to pull it from and where you need to put it. Because if you don't do that, when you run this, you're going to get Java errors. So if you end up seeing that, you may want to check first to see whether or not you copied over the Notes jar file.
Okay. So again, we're going to use an iterator state key. Last change in Domino is a default, and it's just okay to use that as a default. Okay, our last one is our Domino users connector, and again, we're going to use a Domino change detection connector. But actually, my slide is incorrect here. I'm saying set it up in lookup mode, but I see my mode is iterator, but it should be in lookup mode. Let's see. Well, that back slide was actually incorrect. We're setting up a Domino users connector. The session type, again, is going to be local client. We're going to be using, again, because it's a local client, we're going to be using a Notes ID, and Notes ID password is the one that you're going to be referencing here. Now, this is the connector that you use when you're going to be provisioning accounts. Remember, it interacts with the names.nsf and admin p. Okay, now one of the things that you need to keep in mind when you're using those ID files that you're going to be storing wherever you're going to be running your TDI processes is that you need to pre-configure them so that they don't prompt for a password from other notes-based programs before you use them with your TDI assembly line. Otherwise, you're going to get a prompt during the TDI assembly line to enter the password. So if this is a production process that you'll eventually set up, you want to make sure that this is enabled on this particular user ID that you're going to be storing, say on your server where you're going to be running TDI. Okay, so what we've done so far is we've set up 4 connectors that we can use over and over and over again. But now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get into our assembly lines. So we'll set up assembly lines that give us data feeds and our data flow. They'll map the attributes that match between Active Directory and Domino. They'll set up with any kind of exception processes, and we'll create some scripts if we need to, JavaScripts, and then we'll also build some if-else or if-else-if logic. Okay, the first one we're going to build is the most complicated. It's the sync Active Directory to Domino assembly line. We're going to call it sync AD to Domino. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop our connector that we created earlier, 80 changes. We're just going to drop that in the feed, right on top of the feed column there. And then we're going to go down to where we have the ability to set what attributes in this connector we're going to use. And you can choose, you know, as we looked at earlier, when you set up your connector, you can see what attributes are included in each of the connections to your server. So in this case, we're connecting to Active Directory. So we know we've got all those goodies that are connected on the Active Directory side. So do we want all those attributes to be included in this? And in this case, we do. So we just put an asterisk in the work attribute. And you want to confirm that your connection is set up. This is where if you want to make any changes, you can. You will get a prompt because you are using a template. If you do make changes, you know, do you want to make changes to the template or do you want to create a new connector? Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a branch. Now this is one really useful feature in TDI. What we're going to do is we're going to create an if flow component, and we're going to give it a name of if delete. And on our branch, we can put scripts. So if, in this case, if we see that the work operation equals delete, then this is going to trigger an action. So return.value equal work.get operation equal delete. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an else branch that we're going to call add or modify. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a connector. Now, we've already created a Domino users connector as a template, so we're going to take that and we're going to create a new connector called delete Domino. But we're going to use that Domino users connector as our template. The thing we're going to do generally, though, is we're going to change the mode to delete mode because we're going to, this is the assembly line where we're going to want to delete Domino objects if they are deleted in Active Directory. Now, one thing we're going to do differently here that we haven't done yet is we're going to set up a link criteria. And your link criteria is how you define the match between attributes within your assembly line. So what we're doing here is we're saying that if see also, which is a field in your Domino directory, equals $object GUID str, which is an object that contains action information in terms of that account processes and Active Directory, then this is going to be part of our logic in our if delete process. So we're going to make sure that these two objects match in order to process any of these delete components. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an update Domino connector. And we're going to use this, we're going to create this based on the Domino users connector that we've already created. This time we're going to use an update mode. Update mode will only update, it will not add records. And again, we're going to set up a link criteria for this particular connector. So again, if see also equals $object GUID str. Now, in the same connector, we're going to set up mapping, and this is the first time we've encountered mapping. Now, what we want to do is, if any of this, any of these attributes in Active Directory have changed, we want to make sure that they're updated on the Domino side. But the formats are going to be different. So, for example, full name, we want to actually make some changes to that attribute. So we're going to use a little bit of JavaScript, return.value equal cn equal in quotes, work get string, cn plus /o equal top chefs, so that the full name will actually appear as cn equal full name /o equal top chefs on the Domino side, which is the format the Domino expects it. The same with owner. We're going to be using the same type of JavaScript to change that field. A couple things too to note here is that you have the ability to determine whether or not you're going to add or modify a record in this mapping. So in the case of your form attribute, we want to be able to add it, but we don't want to modify it. Again, with short name, we want to be able to add it, but we don't want to be able to modify it. So those are just some things to notice about this slide. And again, my comment here, as I say, the bread and butter of the assembly line, your mapping is where you're going to spend a lot of time too in terms of making sure that your data comes out the way you expect it once the assembly line is run. Now, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to create a before modify script. Now what the script is going to do is it's going to say that if the attribute is already set in notes and that attribute is internet address, then we're not going to change it. So as we said earlier, we want Domino to be the owner of the internet address attribute, so to speak. So if that object in Domino is not blank, we don't want to do anything with it. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to remove that attribute so that it doesn't sync at all. So we've got everything ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the little green 1 button and then confirm that the process is iterating. And you'll see that we've opened a session to the Domino server, the type equal of client. We're also connecting to admin 4. We're connecting to the names.nsf. And if you were to see this assembly line live, what you would see is that we had created some accounts on the Active Directory side. We updated some person information. We also created some accounts that did not exist on the Domino side, so that when we ran this assembly line and then checked on the Domino side, we saw that those accounts, new accounts were created, and then also those accounts that already existed were updated.
So Marie, is this just going to continue to run in the background then? Any time it encounters an AD change, it's going to be running this type of an arrangement just to keep the two in sync, correct?
Correct. Correct. Because we're using change detector connectors.
Okay.
And I could just let this run. So and that's the one nice thing about this type of assembly line and these type of connectors. They know when a change takes place. So it's not something that you have to set up a scheduler or you have to remember to do. They're just going to detect a change automatically, or automatically, as we say. Okay, and this kind of gives you an overview of how the assembly line would actually look. So to kind of back up, we created an AD change connector in our feed. Our data flow had some logic. We had an if statement. We had an else statement. We are going to delete documents in Domino if they were deleted on Active Directory. We're going to add or modify documents on the Domino side, but before they're modified, we're going to make sure that the internet address attribute is not included. Okay. So hopefully y'all are keeping up. This is a lot of detail. But the next assembly line is the simpler one. This is the one where we're going to sync Domino to Active Directory. We're going to include two connectors, the Domino change connector, and then our AD updater. We're going to have some if and else branches, and then we're going to also do something a little different, which we're actually going to send an alert. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our assembly line. In this case, we're going to call it sync Domino to AD. We're going to drag and drop the Domino change connector that we used previously, and we're going to set it up in iterator mode. As we see here, we're using the domino change detector, calling it domino changes, iterator mode. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an if branch. We're going to call it if add or delete. And in this assembly line, we're only going to use this to update information in Active Directory, certain attributes. And we don't want to add things or add accounts on the Active Directory side if they've been added on Domino. And we don't want to delete accounts on the Active Directory side if they've been deleted on Domino. But we want to make sure that somebody knows there's been a change. So we want to make sure we include logic for that. So we're including a little bit of script here in our branch to say if the object has been, if it's not been modified, this is what we're going to be, if it's an add or a delete, we're going to send an alert. And where this shows up is actually in the TDI log. And this is saying that the account has been provisioned directly in Domino. You could actually change this so that it would be more specific if the user has either been provisioned or deleted directly in Domino. This way, so when you're following through on your audit trail, you could see that, well, wait a minute, this is only done on the Domino side. It's just a little bit of JavaScript to do that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an else branch. So if we're not going to be adding or delete, then the next thing we want to do is we're going to modify. Jump ahead. All we're going to do is we're going to create that branch. And we're going to include, I think I must have jumped ahead. We're going to create an update AD connector using our AD Ldap connector. This time it's going to be an update mode as we created earlier. Remember, we're going to use object class equal person, so we're not going to be updating the server objects. And in this case, the link criteria, the pieces and parts that are going to actually link the components between Domino and AD, in this case it's going to be the $DN and $location. Now, we want to make sure that if the internet address on the Domino side has been modified or added, it will be updated on the Active Directory side. And then on the Active Directory side, that attribute is called mail. So we want to make sure that the mapping is set up. And that's the end of our assembly line. So we've created a feed called Domino Changes. We have a data flow with an if statement called if add or delete. If it's an add or a delete, we're going to send an alert. If it's a modify, then we're going to update Active Directory, specifically only the internet address.
So if we wanted to add additional fields that were going to be updated in Active Directory, you would just add the additional mappings in there?
Correct. Because you've already got your link criteria so that the records are linked. So all you need to do is then set up your mapping so that the attribute names were mapped. Because for example, in this case, internet address, that does not map to internet address on the AD side. It maps to mail. So you just need to make sure that those attributes are mapped. And if you have to do any kind of parsing, because we know that Domino attributes look a little differently, if you need to pull out the forward slashes or backslashes, depending on what you're working with, and change it to commas, the mapping is where you would do that, so that it would be AD or Ldap component.
And again, this would just be running in the background alongside the other one that you've got running. And anytime anything occurs, it would trigger this, and you get the results automatically.
And they can actually be running at the same time. So that's the other thing, nice thing about TDI is you can start one assembly line and then start the other assembly line, and you're good to go. So if you've got somebody working on the Active Directory side and they're making changes, and then you've got somebody working on the Domino side and they're making changes, these two assembly lines would detect that. They wouldn't step on one another, but because we've set up processes to kind of manage which attributes are being added, deleted, modified, but they would, because they are two separate processes and two, separate threads, they would update the information at the same time. Okay, so we talked a little bit about provisioning nodes account, and that is a very complicated process, but you can take what we've talked about today in the same kind of assembly lines, and I'm referencing a document here on the tdiusers.org site, which is just the best TDI reference site you ever want to go to, and it specifically has documentation about the objects you want to use if you want to set up an assembly line to provision accounts from either Ldap or Active Directory. I know it's a hot topic. Why should I have to do it twice? Let's just measure measure twice, cut once. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. A couple of the additional things that you might want to take advantage of when you're using TDI from more of an administrative standpoint for directories and stuff is you could take your Domino BlackBerry Enterprise server, that data is stored in a SQL database, and you could pull out your PIN numbers from BlackBerry and actually stick those into your Domino directory if you wanted to have some sort of mechanism in place to have that information in Domino so you didn't have to go to two different places to look for it. So you'd set up a JDBC connector to the BlackBerry Enterprise server SQL database, and then you'd set up your Ldap connector or your Notes database connector, whichever one that you want to focus on, and get that assembly line built that would enable you to keep those two things in sync automatically, much as Marie has talked about when we keep AD and Ldap in sync with each other. So go ahead and go to the next slide. In this particular case, stupid phone. In this particular case, you would have some jar files that you would need to pick up from the Microsoft side or the SQL Server side and drop those into the TDI jar file, much the same as we talk about. Excuse me, my iPhone is going crazy here, as you probably hear. And drop those jar files into the...
I thought that was you, Tom.
Yeah, it was. I just make chimes automatically. You would drop those jar files into the TDI area. And once again, it's very similar to what we had talked about in the first webcast about dropping the notes.jar file into the third-party TDI jar area. You do the same thing here with these particular JDBC jar files. Set up a JDBC connector. Go ahead and go to the next slide. You would set up much the same way as Marie has shown you to get your SQL connector going. JDBC is one of the connectors out there, so you can just go through, configure it, set up the connection to your SQL server with your driver name, your username, your password, the table name is your user config, and you're really off and ready to go at that point, and it's going to do the same type of connection that you had before, or you can do maybe a nightly scheduled pull of all the PIN numbers down each night and keep them in sync. But that's something you might want to keep in mind about what you can do with TDI in addition to just AD to Ldap. Maybe you want to bring BlackBerry information in too. So that's another option.
And in this case, some people run the Bez SQL side. They run it on the same server as Bez and Domino, or they run it in a separate SQL Server environment. Either one of those will work. In this case, you just need to know the server IP and make sure that that port 1433 or the relevant SSL port is open on whichever server you're going to be using.
Okay. Next slide. There's always a lot of buzz about, your single sign-on. How can I make sure that I just have one entry and everything is synced up automatically so people aren't trying to do that manually? TDI is perfect for this. You've got assembly lines that are very similar to what you saw Marie demonstrate in the first part of this session, so you can easily go through and adapt that to start keeping things in sync with each other. I strongly recommend you go out to this Google site and look at the Domino integration piece, where it does talk about TDI, talks about Domino, and it also talks about the Spinego integration, which, I had to get up to speed on that one too, but it's a simple and protected GSS API negotiation mechanism, so you can get this set up in a way that if your Domino side doesn't know what's expected on the other side, the two can work with each other until they figure out the protocol that both of them will exist or will recognize, and then Spinego will go ahead and say, okay, this is the one that we're going to use, so go ahead and communicate with that protocol, and everything will be routed through that way. TDI is a great way for keeping those things in sync with each other.
Yeah, a lot of people are hearing this in terms of in relation to Windows systems and Windows HTTP systems. Tom and I are going to be doing a session at IMLUG, and I'm going to be demonstrating a mechanism that you can use using TDI to facilitate not necessarily a single sign-on, but a mechanism you can use for one user ID, one password mechanism to authenticate Domino systems using the ID and password that you already have stored in your Active Directory or Ldap directories. So I'm going to be doing that at IMLUG.
And I'm sure we'll be sharing the slides on that one too. So,
yeah.
Next slide. Here you have a list of additional resources where you can get more TDI goodness. Strongly recommend the first one there, the TDI-users.org site. Excellent, probably the best single site out there for TDI information that is real world, very detailed, very applicable. A lot of the information comes from a person who's listed at the very bottom of the list, who is Eddie Hartman. He is the TDI guru at IBM, lives, eats, and breathes this stuff, is extremely responsive, loves when people use TDI for stuff. And so if you ever have any questions about TDI, first check out the TDI-users.org site to see if it's already been covered. And if you still have questions, feel free to email Eddie. He truly does love to get questions about this and to talk about TDI. So very, very good resources. Final slide. Here's our contact information if you want to email us. Marie is more the admin guru expert on these things.
Well, I don't know about that.
Okay. In terms of directory integration, I handle more the development side where I'm taking notes databases that are not directory related and moving data back and forth and in and out. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. And Chris, I believe that you have some Q&A stuff that's come in that either Marie or I, probably Marie will get a chance to answer.
Be able to see. If not, I can read through, but we can go back to the. Do you see
I
them all
can't
there?
see it. No. What do I need to do?
You have a tab under questions. You have another drop down called questions. If not, I'll read them and off we go.
Yeah, you may have to read them. I'm not seeing the questions yet.
Yeah, why don't you read them, Jeff?
You know what? It may be off in your toolbar. Actually, you probably turn on later. Let's just read them. So the first one came in earlier. Okay, they want to know if they can sync AD with Domino and connection, if they have Domino and Lotus connections.
Yeah. But you'll need TDI 6.1 to do that.
Okay. Because of the versioning issues?
Correct. Yeah, the connectors that work with Lotus connections are only supported with version 6. I believe Mitch Cohen just gave a session on that at Admin View.
Yes.
I'd reach out to him. We can put you guys in touch with Mitch about that, but that's the version you'd need for that.
And, yeah, for those looking for Mitch, he's at curiousmitch.com is where he is right there, curiousmitch.com. Next one is TDI supported by IBM through PMR support.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In fact, IBM is in the process right now of the latest version of TDI that's in beta. So
Okay.
it's very actively supported and being enhanced. So it's not a technology where you're going to commit to it and then find out 6 months from now that it's an orphaned product. It's very active.
And then we answered the questions on TLS, but I'm going to scroll down. There was some more after that, some good ones down here. Can the Domino server and Ldap addresses be profiled so that applications running in test and production can run the same code without hard coding them into the wizard? Meaning, can you create, I guess, different profiles for each one, for production and for a test?
In terms of, I guess I'm going to
I guess what you're doing
guess.
is creating different scripts.
Or assembly lines
yeah,
to.
different. Yeah. Actually, you know what? Well, you know what? I'll put this one on the side, and we'll email directly to them because the next one's real easy.
Okay.
You need only the ID file, not a notes client on the TDI machine.
Correct.
The jar file takes care of the other.
Well, you need the jar file, notes.jar, and then you need the ID file
Not
for the local
client.
Correct, just for that local client connection.
All right. Next one. In getting changes from AD, how do you ensure the full text index on names NSF is updated to include the latest changes Domino document and changes in Domino document, so that the Domino user's connector will find the document to be changed, rather than not finding the document and adding a new one as a new person document? Does that make sense?
Well, the changes get fed to admin P.
Okay.
So that's admin P is going to manage that process in terms of adding new accounts or deleting them. So it's not really a full text index process.
So admin P needs to look for the account in the Domino directory.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
If you're going from AD to Domino to add accounts, then it's actually an admin P admin4.nsf process. So admin P is the one that's going to be needing to be kept in pretty good shape in terms of full text indexing and things like that. But what I've seen, I have a really large environment here, and I've not seen any indexing issues in trying to keep up with that kind of thing. So.
Okay. I'll put that one out there, and it seems he left, so we'll put it in the public side, and he can see it later on if he needs to. All right. Next one said, what if you only want to move changes on a schedule, but only the items that changed?
You can do that.
Okay.
You just you just wouldn't necessarily set up a change detector, or you wouldn't leave your assembly line running all the time. You can set up event timers so that it would fire up every 2 hours, every 3 hours. You have that flexibility.
Okay. All right. Assembly line sounds like the Bow Street Portlet Factory terminology. So is this based on IBM WebSphere Portlet Factory? If so, does that product have a Domino change detector as well? So what version? I guess they're asking, is there an easy way to change it? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I don't think it has. It's not a WebSphere install at all.
Yay!
and it's only with version 7 moved to an Eclipse environment. It's been in assembly line for 5 years. So I think they're just two completely unrelated products.
All right. Now this one, there's two of these in a row. Can TDI read the Active Directory user password and update HTTP with that information? And Notes ID, it asks both.
Well, I'm going to kind of caveat that. There are password synchronization tools within TDI. You can set up those type of processes within TDI, and they would update the HTTP password field in the names.nsf. You would, in order to push that down to the ID file, you would have to have the process running on the Domino side that automatically detects when the HTTP password change takes place. So that's a separate process. That's outside of TDI. I would caution people on that, though. If you have a really large environment, if you have, say, 10,000 users or more, you want to really think about whether or not you want that kind of overhead on your Domino side. That's a lot of hits on your names.nsf to be constantly checking for password authentication. There are a lot of other mechanisms to be used for authentication other than making sure that that password is synchronized in the names.nsf.
Questions are flying in now, so we're going to keep on time. It says you demonstrated a local client rather than a server. If the client is down, then the change will not be detected, or will be detected the next time it comes back online?
The local client is just a type of connection. It's not. It's kind of confusing because it's not as if it's not Notes client related. But if, for example, the Domino server is down, the TDI process is not going to take place.
Right. Will it pick back up where it left off when it comes in?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. There's a couple really good ones. I'm going to skip through a couple good ones here. This one, we don't allow Ldap users write permissions. Are we then unable to sync with AD and Domino?
Yeah.
So, because you had one of your slides where you had to click on write access for Ldap.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can. It just depends on what you want to do. If you don't want to update AD, then you don't need write access. So, but you can still use AD to update stuff in Domino. So it would be one way only. It would be AD to Domino only.
Okay. A good one here. Tom, you kind of touched on this one, actually. With the TDI license included with Domino, can it be used to also connect to Bez and SQL?
So long as one of the ends is a Domino end.
I see the way this works. Okay. Got it. A couple excellent sessions, guys. There was one other one we had in here and I wanted to get to before we ran out of time. Where'd it go? Sorry, there was they asked a lot of questions. Someone asked about creating a new user in AD, not modify or delete, but actually create a new user in AD. Did you cover that in the slides?
No, we did not.
Okay.
Because we were only, from the Domino side, we were only doing an update of a particular attribute. But you could do that. You just want to, kind of outline how you are, in which direction do you want things to flow.
You need to outline the assembly line, then, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Map it out. What do you want to be the owner of the data? Who do you want to be the primary keeper of ID files or IDs? Is your Domino directory the primary directory in your organization, or is AD?
Okay.
That's what you kind of have to think about. What's the primary directory?
Gotcha. You had one or two stray ones, but we're getting at the end of time, so let me grab this real quick so we can keep us on time and get us out of here. I know that'll scare everybody. Oh, wait. Will there be another webinar on TDI? Will there be one more on TDI? We had the past one, which will get the link to everybody. But what about another one? Do we have a third one in the series?
We talked to Mitch possibly about doing one. to, for people who are interested in connections.
Gotcha.
We can,
if we have somebody says,
People are saying yes, yes, yes. I'm just telling you.
if they say yes, we want another TDI session, and we would like to see one that focuses on fill in the blank, let us know, and we'll see what we can do. I mean, we've taken it from, the dev side and from the administration side. We have thought about doing one from the connection side, but if there's some other mindset out there about what you'd like to see us do, please let us know, because we'd be more than happy to consider that.
I guess I'm stuck with that too then. Okay, no, you're up to 4 or 5 people saying yes. A couple with Lotus Notes and connections. Some advanced dirty connection tricks, things like that. One more question, then we're going to switch over and get out of here. I'm assuming you can connect to a web service as well. Maybe that was covered on the dev side of TDI. I believe that was in the dev side, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. In fact, one of the things that I still need to work on in my copious free time is trying to get Domino, or trying to get notes information to pull from that, dirty Microsoft SharePoint word. And probably one of the best ways to do that is in SharePoint you can easily set up web services to deliver up data. So what I'm going to be looking at trying to do, and this may be one of our TDI sessions, is getting data into notes from SharePoint, and I'll probably be using a connector that uses web service to pull that.
All right, well, let me say this. So Marie and Tom's information is on here. The replay link will go to everybody, so that is not an issue at all. You guys will get the links that you need for all of that stuff entirely. Marie, I'm going to steal back from you real quick.
Okay.
And tell everybody, if you want to see them live and in person together, standing side by side, Tom and Marie.
I'm taller.
Get
Not
to,
by much.
Oh, here we go. Get to IMLUG. It's free, guys. It's the North American User Group Gathering, second year out. We had 23 sessions last year, hundreds of people, big sponsors. It's a lot of fun. It's going to be in St. Louis August 2nd and 3rd. You can register now at imlug.org. It's filling up, so please get on that soon and get that done and over with. And as well as everything else, look for some more sessions that are coming up. Like I said, we're going to possibly have another TDI we're talking about. I'll get the link out for your previous dev session to TDI. We discussed it before we started, and we're gonna make it public, aren't we? We're just going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to make it public, but otherwise, everyone here will get a link to that as well. I'll include it in the follow-up on this. Next week, Bill Michalski with his seminar on e-discovery and also compliancy. It's a great session. And then following up, we'll have one on plugins and widgets coming up. So we have a sponsor for Bill Michalski, and that is going to be Secure Track and Extracom, and then Plantronics will be talking with us at the plugin session because they announced new plugins. So anything else, you two? Otherwise, you guys had a ton of yes, do a third one, excellent jobs, thanks, a couple laughs at the word SharePoint. But any unanswered, so everyone knows, any unanswered questions, I keep an output of the questions. If we can get them answered, we'll send them over to you, or at least put them in the notes itself, the blog post. So.
Okay.
You too, thank you very much. We're on time. Everyone, thank you for attending another one, and that is it for another Consultant in Your Pocket webinar. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Pleasure.